The silver reckoning is finally here, and there is no place left for the guilty to hide from the light of justice. Experience the high-stakes drama of a final confrontation that will change the lives of our characters forever. Subscribe now and witness the ultimate balance of fate.
The scratching started at 1:20 in the morning, and it wasn't on my front door. It was on the basement window. I'd been half asleep on the couch with the TV still on, some late-night infomercial casting blue light across the living room, when I heard it. Not knocking, not tapping, scratching like fingernails dragging across glass, slow and deliberate. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because after you hear this story, you'll never ignore a strange sound in your house the same way again. My name is Jocelyn Reeves. I'm a social worker in a small town outside of Savannah, Georgia, the kind of place where people leave their screen doors unlocked and wave at every car that passes. I moved here 3 years ago after my divorce, looking for the kind of quiet that doesn't exist in Atlanta. I found it, or I thought I did, on a dead-end street lined with magnolia trees and houses that all looked like they'd been built in the 70s and loved ever since. My neighbor across the street was a woman named Harper Sinclair. She was maybe 50, thin, always dressed neatly even when she was just pulling weeds from her flower bed. She kept to herself mostly, polite but distant. She had a daughter, around 12 or 13, who I'd see waiting for the school bus some mornings. The girl always had her backpack pulled tight against her chest and her eyes down. I'd wave. She'd give me this tiny nod, almost like she was asking permission to acknowledge me. I'd been a social worker long enough to recognize the signs. The way Harper would appear with sunglasses on cloudy days. The way the girl flinched when car doors slammed, the curtains that never opened on the second floor. But I also knew that suspicion isn't evidence, and in my line of work, jumping to conclusions can destroy lives just as easily as ignoring problems. So I watched, and I waited. And I told myself that if something was wrong, I'd see it clearly enough to act. That night, I wasn't waiting for anything. I was just tired. The scratching came again, louder this time. I muted the TV and sat perfectly still. My house has a walkout basement that opens to the backyard, and the windows sit at ground level on the side that faces the street. Nobody should have been down there. Nobody had any reason to be. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and crept down the basement stairs. The concrete was cold under my bare feet. I could hear my own breathing echoing off the walls, and I hated how loud it sounded. When I reached the window, I pressed my face close to the glass and aimed the flashlight out. 2 eyes stared back at me. I merely dropped the flashlight. Then I realized it was the girl, Harper's daughter. She was crouching outside the window in the dark, her face streaked with tears, her lips moving but making no sound. She was wearing a thin nightgown and no shoes, and even through the glass I could see she was shaking. I fumbled with the window latch and pushed it open. Cold October air rushed in. "Please," she whispered. "Can I come in? Don't turn on any lights, please." I pulled her through the window. She was so light it scared me. Her arms were like twigs, and when I set her down on the basement floor, her knees buckled. I caught her before she hit the ground. "Brooke," I said, because I'd heard Harper call her that once. "Brooke, what happened?" "Are you hurt?" She grabbed my wrist with both hands, and her grip was surprisingly strong for a child that thin. "You can't call anyone," she said. "Not the police, not anyone. They'll come, and they'll take me back, and it'll be worse." "Who will come?" She shook her head. "Just please." "Can I stay here tonight? Just tonight?" Every protocol I'd ever learned told me to call someone. The police, CPS, my supervisor. But the look in that child's eyes told me something else. It told me that whoever she was running from, she believed with absolute certainty that the system wouldn't protect her. And honestly, in my years as a social worker, I'd seen enough cases to know she might be right. I brought her upstairs, wrapped her in a blanket, and sat her at the kitchen table. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I used the small lamp above the stove instead, the one that barely cast enough light to see by. She kept glancing at the windows, pulling the blanket tighter every time a car passed on the road outside. I heated up some soup on the stove, tomato basil from a can, and set it in front of her. She stared at it like she'd forgotten what food looked like. Then she picked up the spoon and ate so fast I was afraid she'd burn her mouth. "When's the last time you ate?" I asked. She thought about it. "Tuesday, I think. Mom gave me crackers." It was Friday. I sat down across from her and folded my hands on the table. I didn't push. I didn't interrogate. I just sat there and let the silence do its work. After a while, she put the spoon down and looked at me. "Mom's not bad," she said, and her voice cracked. "She tries. But the people she works for, they don't let her stop. And now they want me too." "Want you for what?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She swallowed it down like she'd had years of practice. "There's a house outside town, off Miller's Creek Road. It looks like a regular house, but it's not. People go in, and they don't come out the same. Some of them don't come out at all." My stomach dropped. I'd driven past Miller's Creek Road 100 times. It was a rural stretch with a few scattered properties, mostly farmland and pine forest. I'd never noticed anything unusual. "Brooke, what do they do in that house?" She pulled the blanket over her head, so only her eyes showed. "They call it the program. Mom said it started as a way to help people, like a clinic. But it changed. The man who runs it, everyone calls him the director. He picks people nobody will miss. People from shelters. People passing through town. And he does things to them. Tests. Experiments. Mom keeps the records. She's been keeping them for years because she's too scared to stop." I felt sick. Physically, violently sick. But I kept my face calm because that child needed me to be calm. "Is that why your mom has bruises?" Brooke nodded. "When she tried to quit last year, they hurt her. They said if she talked, they'd take me into the program. So she stayed. And tonight? What happened tonight? She told me to run." Brooke's voice was barely audible. She said they're moving everyone out of the house tomorrow. Destroying everything. All the records, all the evidence. She said once it's gone, nobody will ever know what happened there. She told me to come to you because you're a social worker and you'd know what to do. She reached into the pocket of her nightgown and pulled out a USB drive, small and blue, with a piece of masking tape on it. Written on the tape in shaky handwriting were the words, "Everything is here." "Mom copied the files," Brooke said. "All of them. Names, dates, what they did to people. She said if the right person gets this, it can stop them." I stared at that little blue drive sitting on my kitchen table, and I understood exactly what Harper had done. She'd spent years trapped in something monstrous, and she'd used that time to build a case, file by file, record by record, waiting for the moment she could get it out. And when that moment came, she didn't run herself. She sent her daughter. Because she knew they'd be watching her. And she knew they wouldn't be watching me. "Brooke, where is your mom right now?" "Still at the house. She's working tonight. She has to act normal or they'll know." I picked up the USB drive and turned it over in my hand. It weighed almost nothing. But what it carried was heavier than anything I'd ever held. And then my phone buzzed on the counter. I looked at the screen. No caller ID. I didn't answer. It buzzed again. Same thing. Then a text came through from a number I didn't recognize. "We know she's not in her bed." My blood went cold. "They check on me," Brooke whispered. "Every night. Cameras in the house. They know I'm gone." I moved to the window and looked out through the blinds. Across the street, Harper's house was dark. But parked 2 houses down on the opposite side of the road was a black sedan I'd never seen before. The engine was running. I could see the faint glow of a dashboard light inside. "They're already here," I said. Brooke started crying then, silently, her shoulders shaking under the blanket. "I shouldn't have come here. Now they know about you." I knelt in front of her and took her hands. "Listen to me. You did exactly the right thing. Your mom sent you here because she trusts me, and I'm going to make sure that trust means something. Okay?" She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I needed to think. If I called the police, there was no guarantee they'd act fast enough or act at all. Brooke said the people running this had connections. In a small town, that could mean anything. The sheriff played golf with half the businessmen in the county. The mayor owed favors to people I'd never heard of. I'd seen cases get buried before, files lost, reports reclassified. I'd watched children fall through cracks that shouldn't have existed. But I also had a resource that most people didn't. My ex-husband, Ruben, was a journalist, an investigative reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. We'd split up because he worked 80-hour weeks and I needed someone who'd actually come home for dinner, but we'd stayed on decent terms. He was good at his job, relentless. And most importantly, he had contacts at the FBI field office in Atlanta from a federal corruption story he'd broken 2 years earlier. I grabbed my personal laptop, the one I used for work, and plugged in the USB drive. The files opened in neat folders: medical records, financial transactions, staff rosters, photographs. I didn't look at the photographs for long. What I saw in the first 3 was enough to make my hand shake so badly I could barely grip the mouse. These weren't experiments. They were atrocities. I copied everything onto my laptop, then removed the USB drive and slid it into the lining of my winter coat hanging in the closet. If they came for the laptop, the original would still exist. Then I called Ruben. He picked up on the second ring, even though it was nearly 2 in the morning. That was one thing about him. He never slept much. "Joss, what's wrong?" I told him. All of it. I kept my voice low and steady, even though everything inside me was screaming. He listened without interrupting, which told me he understood the gravity. Ruben only stayed silent when something was serious. When I finished, he said, "Don't move. Don't go outside. Don't answer the door. I'm calling Agent Tatiana Howe. She's FBI, and she's not from your area, which means she's not compromised. I'll have someone there by morning. Ruben, there's a car parked outside right now." "I know." "That's why you're not going outside." He paused. "Is the kid okay?" I looked at Brooke, who had fallen asleep at the kitchen table with her head on her arms. "She's exhausted, but she's okay. Keep her safe, Joss. I'm on this." He hung up. I locked every door, every window, and pushed a chair under the back door handle. I turned off every light in the house and sat in the dark with Brooke sleeping next to me, listening to the sounds outside. For 3 hours, nothing happened. The black sedan didn't move. No one approached the house. But I could feel them out there, waiting, calculating, deciding what to do about the social worker across the street, who now had their secrets on her laptop. Around 5 in the morning, I heard another car pull up. Then another. I peeked through the blinds and saw 2 more vehicles, both dark-colored SUVs, park near the sedan. Men in dark clothing got out and conferred quietly under the streetlight. One of them pointed at my house. My phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number: "Return what doesn't belong to you. This ends quietly if you cooperate." I didn't respond. At 6:15, headlights swept across the front of my house from a different direction. A white government sedan pulled up, followed by 2 unmarked vehicles. The doors opened and men and women in FBI windbreakers stepped out, moving with a precision that told me Ruben had made good on his word. The men by the black sedan saw them. One reached for something inside his jacket. An FBI agent raised a hand and called out a warning. For a moment, everything hung in the balance, that sickening pause where anything could happen. Then the sedan's doors opened and the men put their hands up. I woke Brooke gently. "Someone's here," I said. "Good people. The kind that can actually help." She looked at me with those enormous eyes, and for the first time since she'd crawled through my basement window, I saw something other than fear in them. It was small, fragile, barely there. But it was hope. Agent Howe was a tall woman with short gray hair and a face that looked like it had heard every terrible story the world had to offer and decided to keep fighting anyway. She sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where Brooke had eaten soup hours earlier, and reviewed the files on my laptop with an expression that shifted from professional detachment to something much more personal. "How long has this been operating?" she asked. "Years," I said. "According to the files, at least 7. She closed the laptop carefully, like she was handling evidence at a crime scene, which she was. "We're sending a team to the property on Millers Creek Road within the hour. We've already secured the perimeter. Nobody's getting in or out." "Harper," I said. "Brooke's mother, she's still there." Agent Howe nodded. "We know. Extracting her is our first priority." I wanted to ask if Harper would be safe, if she'd be treated as a victim or an accomplice, if the system that had failed her for years would somehow manage to get it right this time. But I've been in this work long enough to know that those questions didn't have answers yet. They play out over weeks and months, in courtrooms and custody hearings and therapy sessions. The only thing I could do right now was make sure Brooke was okay. Brooke sat on my couch with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of hot chocolate in her hands, watching the FBI agents move in and out of my house. She hadn't said much since they arrived. A female agent sat next to her, speaking softly. But Brooke's eyes kept drifting to the window, looking for her mother. At 9:23 that morning, an FBI convoy returned from Millers Creek Road. I knew because I heard the sirens first, then saw the vehicles through the window. Agent Howe stepped outside to meet them, and when she came back, her face was different, harder, but also relieved. "We have her," she said. "Harper is in custody, and she's cooperating fully. The director, a man named Anton Varga, has been arrested along with 11 members of his staff. We've recovered extensive physical evidence from the facility." She paused, and her voice softened just slightly. "Your neighbor is very brave. What she documented, it's going to dismantle this entire operation." Brooke heard that part. Her cup of hot chocolate stopped halfway to her mouth, and her lower lip trembled. "Is my mom in trouble?" Agent Howe note down to Brooke's level. "Your mom helped us stop very bad people. We're going to make sure she's treated fairly. I can promise you that." It wasn't the blanket reassurance I'd feared. There was weight behind it. I could see it in Agent Howe's eyes. In the weeks that followed, the story broke wide open. Rubin published a 3-part investigation in the AJC that got picked up nationally. The facility on Millers Creek Road, which had operated behind the facade of a rural wellness retreat, was exposed as a site where vulnerable people, undocumented immigrants, unhoused individuals, people released from psychiatric facilities with nowhere to go, had been subjected to unauthorized pharmaceutical trials. The drugs were experimental. The consent was non-existent. Some of the subjects had died. Their bodies had been buried in a clearing behind the property, under mounds of fresh dirt that the neighbors had assumed were from landscaping. The director, Anton Varga, turned out to be a former pharmaceutical researcher who'd lost his medical license years earlier and reinvented himself in a place nobody would look twice. He'd built relationships with local officials, donated to community projects, attended church every Sunday. He was charming and generous and utterly without conscience. 14 people were indicted. 3 local officials were removed from their positions. A state senator's office was investigated for approving grant money that had been funneled into the operation. Harper Sinclair was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. She'd been recruited into the program 7 years ago under the promise of a well-paying administrative job. By the time she understood what was actually happening, they had enough leverage over her to make leaving impossible. They'd threatened Brooke. They'd monitored their home. They'd controlled every aspect of her life. But they hadn't controlled her conscience. Every night for 5 years, Harper had copied files, photographed documents, and recorded conversations using a device hidden in her coat pocket. She'd built a case in the dark, piece by piece, knowing that one day she'd need it. She just hadn't known when. The answer turned out to be the night she overheard Varga telling his staff to begin accelerated processing on the remaining subjects and destroy all documentation within 48 hours. Someone had talked. An inspection was coming. The window to act was closing. So Harper did the only thing she could. She copied the final files, put the USB drive in her daughter's pocket, and told her to run to the social worker across the street. Then she went back to work and pretended nothing had changed, buying Brooke the time she needed to get out. When I think about that, about what it took for Harper to stay behind and act normal while her daughter ran through the dark, I can barely hold it together. That kind of courage doesn't make headlines. It doesn't come with medals or press conferences. It's the kind that happens in silence, in the space between terror and love, where a mother decides that her child's safety matters more than her own survival. Brooke stayed with me for 11 days while the legal proceedings began. I filed for emergency foster care, and the court approved it within 48 hours. She slept in my spare room with the door open and a nightlight on, and for the first few nights, I heard her crying softly into her pillow. I didn't go in. I didn't try to fix it. I just left my door open too, so she'd know I was there. On the fourth night, she came into my room and stood in the doorway. "Can I sit with you?" she asked. Of course. She sat on the edge of my bed and pulled her knees up to her chest. My mom used to say that the world isn't safe, but some people in it are. I felt my throat tighten. Your mom is a smart woman. Do you think she'll come home? I think she's doing everything she can to come back to you. Brooke leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat like that in the dark for a long time, not speaking, just breathing. Harper was released from federal custody 6 weeks later. The reunification process took another month. Supervised visits first, then overnight stays, then full custody restoration. I was there for every step of it, not as a social worker, but as a neighbor, as a friend. The day Harper moved back into her house across the street, she came to my door. She looked different. Thinner, older, but her eyes were clear. The sunglasses were gone. She stood on my porch with her hands clasped in front of her, and for a moment she just looked at me. "You opened your window," she said. I smiled. "Your daughter scratched on the glass. I know." Her voice wavered. "I spent 7 years keeping quiet because I thought silence would keep her safe. And then one night I realized that silence was the cage, not the protection. The only way out was through someone who would listen." She reached out and took my hand. "Thank you for listening." I held her hand and nodded because I didn't trust my voice. That evening, I sat on my front porch and looked out at the street. The magnolia trees were bare now. November had taken the last of their leaves, but the branches were already budding for spring. Harper's porch light was on for the first time in years. I could see Brooke through the front window, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, and Harper standing at the stove cooking something. A normal evening. The most ordinary, unremarkable thing in the world. And it meant everything. My phone buzzed, a text from Ruben. "The series just won a Peabody nomination. Thought you should know. None of this happens without you." I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. I thought about all the doors I'd walked through in my career. All the homes I'd entered as a social worker. All the reports I'd filed and the cases I'd managed. I thought about how many times the system had worked and how many times it hadn't. I thought about the people who fell through the cracks and the ones who were pushed. And I thought about a 12-year-old girl scratching on a basement window in the middle of the night, trusting a stranger with her mother's secret because there was no one else left to trust. We don't get to choose the moments that define us. They show up uninvited, at 1 a.m, with tears on their face and a USB drive in their pocket. What we choose is whether we open the window or pretend we didn't hear the scratching, whether we turn on the light or stay in the dark, whether we reach out our hands or keep them folded in our laps. I opened the window, and my life will never be the same, but I don't want it to be, because now I know exactly who I am when it matters, and I can live with that. If this story moved you, go ahead and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters, and your support is what keeps powerful stories like this one alive.